Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. This is our first public meeting for the Route 53 and 139 corridor study that we have done in the town of Pembroke this year. This is a project that started last fall, in September, October in earnest, and then been carrying it out since then. And now we're kind of getting into the end stages of this project and starting to meet with the public. Go to the next one. So, brief introduction of who we are. So, first of all, my name is Bill McNulty. I'm a principal transportation planner with the Old Colony Planning Council. The Old Colony Planning Council is the planning staff to the Old Colony Metropolitan Planning Organization. The Old Colony MPO serves the town of Pembroke and 16 other cities and towns in southeastern Massachusetts in a region that stretches from northwest to southeast, from Stoughton southeastward towards Plymouth. We've always had a great working relationship with the town of Pembroke, and we were really happy to take on this study. This corridor, I should say, was identified uh, through various planning efforts that we conduct year to year, one of which was a couple of years ago. We did a major bottleneck identification study, and 139, particularly at Route 3, is a very well-known bottleneck. And that prompted us wanting to take a look at this. The so I have several of my colleagues on tonight, including our deputy director and transportation program manager Charles Kilmer, as well as my co-manager on this study, Guo Lee, and several other staff as well. Do we have anybody from the town of Pembroke on the meeting who would like to be publicly, who would like to be recognized? Okay, no worries. We'll go to the next slide. So this is the agenda for tonight. So I'll give a brief overview of what this corridor study entailed, some of the techniques that we use, some of the findings that we have found, and towards the end, we'll talk about some of the preliminary findings and suggestions and the next steps on how we are going to wrap this study up. For public engagement, we did do a survey. I'll talk about that survey in a moment. That received about 200 and specifically 241 responses. So we were pleased with the response rate with that. We About 80% of the respondents were from the town of Pembroke, 7% were from Marshfield, 3% from Hanover, then 10% were from other towns in the region like Hanson. So that just kind of highlighted what we already knew, that this is a major corridor for regional travel. The people that are using it stretch well beyond the town of Pembroke. So some of the excuse me, we coordinated with MassDOT. This is a MassDOT owned facility. I'll talk about that in a moment. 100% of this corridor is under the jurisdiction of MassDOT. We've also coordinated several times with the town of Pembroke. We've had multiple coordination meetings with both the town and the state, talking about the study as we've gone along. And it's been a very cooperative process all throughout. We use we use multitude of data collection, including traffic counts, drone footage, area footage, turning movement counts, peak hour turning movement counts, looking at intersections. We assessed a culvert on the western end of the corridor, closer to Route 53. So we've done quite a bit of analysis going into this. So this corridor study looks at about 2.5 miles of corridor, stretching from the town of Hanover on a relatively short section of Route 53 from the Hanover town line to its intersection with Scoosett Street. And then looking at the remainder of the Route 139 corridor from Route 53 all the way to the Marshall Town line. It is, as I mentioned, 100% under the jurisdiction of the town of 100% under the jurisdiction of MassDOT. It is a it is a principal arterial, meaning it's designed for moderate, long distance regional travel that supports both commuting purposes for residents as well as supporting local commerce and industry. Vehicle volumes range between about 17,000 to about 23,500, which makes it one of the busier corridors in our region. This corridor does carry a lot of traffic, and speeds ranged roughly between 30 miles per hour to about 45 miles per hour. In some places, a little bit higher than 45 miles per hour. And I'll talk a little more about those specifics in a moment. So before we get into vehicular traffic, just give you an idea of what this corridor offers in terms of amenities for bicyclists, pedestrians, and transit. So when we talk about bicyclists and pedestrians, we often refer to them as vulnerable roadway users, just because any incident on the corridor that involves them, they are very vulnerable. They don't have a lot of protection around them. They're at very high risk for serious injuries and fatalities if they're in a traffic-related accident. So you can see almost the entire length of this corridor does have sidewalk that varies in condition, also varies in width, ranges between about 3 feet to 5 feet wide, uh, wide enough for at least one person to walk. In some cases, two people side by side. Certainly not wide enough for multimodal use. So it'd be very difficult for a bicyclist to use that sidewalk. And there is a section from Old Oak Street where the um, the urgent care facility is, to the Marshall Town line, where there are no sidewalks at all. There are no bicycle facilities along this corridor, and there is some transit service provided by GATRA that runs from the town of Marshfield into Pembroke and comes up to the North Road Plaza. And that transit service does provide connections to the town of Kingston, where you can make further connections to MBTA commuter rail. So looking at the zoning along the corridor, again, I don't think it's very surprising to anyone. It's mostly zoned uh, for business and commerce, and along the corridor itself. Just beyond those edges, just beyond that commercial development, there is a lot of residential zoning. But then closer to the Route 3 interchange, you do have some very large parcels that are zoned for industrial. And then accordingly, so existing land use near the Route 3 interchange, we see a lot of high density commercial development as well as industrial commerce park development. Um, as you get more west along the corridor, the commercial becomes more almost like independent, freestanding businesses, much less densely developed business development. But then that density increases again at Route 53. And there is a lot of residential development beyond that. Beyond that, business development as well as a lot of forested areas and wetlands, and that brings in um, environmental protection that we want to make sure is incorporated in the study, especially when it relates to stormwater runoff. So looking at volumes and speeds, so volume tends to be very high near basically between Oak Street and the Marshall Town line. This is where we see some of our highest traffic volumes. It's not surprising, obviously that's where the highway interchange is. That's also where we have the most commercial development. Speed really not an issue. It's congested much of the time, so it's hard to speed in that area. Once you get west of Oak Street, and especially once you get west of North River Plaza, speeds do pick up. Um, Speeds generally in line with the speed limits, so it's not quote unquote speeding per se, but they are speeds that um, we start to be concerned when it comes to safety for pedestrians and bicyclists. Anything higher than 45 miles per hour, a crash that involves a pedestrian or a bicyclist, it's going to be a very high risk for a serious injury, if not fatal injury to that person. So that is something that we keep in mind. We always want to balance. We, obviously, we want to balance regional movement as with safety for all users. Um, so the volume does decrease a little bit west of Oak Street, and then picks up again from Route 53, where Route 53, as you know, is a very busy corridor throughout the region, especially north of Scoosett Street. So again, so I mentioned a little moment ago, we did a survey uh, of people in the region, got about 241 responses. Results are pretty interesting. So I already gave a breakdown of where the responses are from. But other things that we asked, so we asked, for example, what your primary trip purpose was. A lot of people would assume commuting would be number one answer, but uh, shopping was actually the number one answer. And when you think about all the development near Route 3, that's not surprising. Commuting was the second most common primary trip answer. And then when we asked what's your secondary most common trip purpose, medical actually came in as the most common secondary purpose. Again, when we gave it a little bit more thought, not that surprising. You do have the Brigham and Women's Medical Center there on Oak Street. You have the urgent care by the highway. You have other medical buildings, medical offices here and there. So that was interesting that medical came up as number uh, number one most common secondary purpose. And when we think of that, so when we see that, then we start to think beyond motor vehicle traffic. We think about people who are using those facilities and may not be able to get to those facilities by car. And then so we start to assess, do we need more transit? Do we need more ride sharing? That that sort of thing. Um, we asked people what they saw as the most serious safety concerns along this corridor. Intersection safety, crashes came in as a top answer, but then lane merges and merging and lane changes came in as no second, and that's certainly something we've seen from during field visits out there. Um, that segment near the interchange, you have a lot of queuing from left turn lanes getting onto the Route 3 ramps. Those left turn lanes are not long enough to store the demand, so they flow back into the travel lanes. Now suddenly you have people that are in the travel lanes making sudden lane changes to try to avoid the left turn queue, and so that was not surprising. That came up as a major safety concern among the people, and all of this is being incorporated into our study. So we took a 5-year crash history, all the crashes that occurred from 2021 through 2025. We plotted them out along the corridor and we came up with this heat map. So you see the individual red dots, those are the individual crashes that occurred along this corridor from 20 in that 5-year period. And then when you start to see that shading, when you get from the blue to the green to the yellow to the red, this is where crashes are really concentrating, and uh, this gives us a really good indicator of where safety concerns are. So eh, the middle section, if you will, of the corridor, it's not that crashes aren't occurring, but it's less of a concern as the almost the bookends of this corridor, with Route 3 in changes as well as Route 53. We further broke that down looking at individual intersections. Um, so we looked at the crash rate, the EPDO, and also looked up if the intersection was an H-shift crash cluster. So crash rate, simply numerical value, it's the total number of crashes per million entering vehicles at an intersection. On average, an unsignalized intersection, its crash rate would be 0.57, and a signalized intersection, its average crash rate would be 0.75. EPDO, that's another figure that we use. So that stands for the equivalent to property damage only. So we look at all the crashes and then we look at how severe those crashes were. So if the crash was only resulted in only resulted in property damage and did not result in an injury, that is a crash that gets a value of 1. But then we look at injuries, and then so if the injury was serious or incapacitating, is sometimes the word that's used, or if the injury was fatal, then the crash receives a point value of 21. So it's a 21 point based system, and then we get a cumulative, we get a sum. So we can see some of these intersections have pretty high EPDO values. And one thing that we note is there are intersections where the crash rate is relatively low, but then the EPDO is high. And what that's telling us is, you know, for in terms of volume, the intersection may not be experiencing a lot of crashes. It's certainly not an unusual amount of crashes given volume, but the crashes that are occurring are pretty severe if the EPDO is high. So we see that in quite a few of these intersections. And finally, HZIP crash cluster. So HZIP stands for the Highway Safety Improvement Plan. That's a plan that's developed by the state. Every state's required to have one as mandatory by the Federal Highway Administration. And if it's a crash cluster, that means it's among the top 5% of most hazardous intersections in the state. And so the intersection of Route 139 at Oak Street and Pembroke Square, that would be the one intersection along this corridor that's identified as a HF crash cluster. And when a intersection is identified as a crash cluster, that does open up to additional funding sources, basically. If the state were to pursue improvements at that intersection, there's another pot of money that it can dip into for HF improvements. So if you want to go to the next slide again, so this is just more of the intersections along the corridor. This is more the intersection on the western end of the corridor. A lot of these intersections, not much of a crash problem at all. That being the intersection of the exception being Route 139, Route 53. I will note that the state recently made improvements at that intersection. Those improvements have helped a lot. So next one. So now we can talk about some of the risk that we've identified at these intersections and segments, and we'll talk about the ones with the highest risk. So intersection of Route 139 at Old Oak Street, where the urgent care facility is. This has been identified as a secondary risk site for multi-vehicle angled collisions and crashes involving pedestrians and crashes involving bicyclists. So what that means is when something has a secondary risk site, it's a system that's looking at both past performance crashes as well as predictable crashes using a multitude of factors of volume, turning movements, uh, driver behavior, vulnerable user behavior, and it's predicting where the highest risk is. So this is a when we look, so for this intersection, for example, this would be a location where we would expect be high risk for serious injuries and fatalities to those involved in multi-vehicle angled collisions or bicyclists and pedestrians. Moving on to Route 139 at the Route 3 northbound ramps. Again, this is a secondary risk for injuries and fatalities for those involved in angled collisions. And the other side of the highway, intersection 139 Route 3 north, Route 3 southbound. So here, this is a primary risk. So higher risk for serious injuries and fatalities for those involved in angled collisions, as well as a secondary risk for those on bicycles. And I'll know, so the purpose of identifying where these risks are, it targets where we want to focus our recommendations in this study. It doesn't mean it's the only places where we're going to make recommendations, but it gives us the good starting point where we want to target recommendations. The intersection of 139 at Old Oak Street and North River Plaza. This is a primary risk site for uh, those involved in angled collisions. And then the intersection on the western end at Route 139, Route 53. This is a primary risk site for those involved in multi-vehicle angled collisions, as well as those on bicycles, and secondary risk for pedestrians. So we also looked at segments. So this looks at high risk segments for bicyclists. There is a primary risk segment for bicyclists on 139, that being from section from Old Oak Street to Route 3 northbound. So basically from Lowe's up to the up to where underneath the highway overpass and then to where the urgent care is. That would be a high risk primary risk site for bicyclists. And then secondary risks, multiple segments along this corridor have been identified as secondary risk. I will note that part of this is this corridor has also been identified as having medium to high likelihood for everyday biking by the state. That meaning, given the land use in the towns of Marshfield, Hanover, and Pembroke, and um, residents, and the desire to make daily trips to certain types of land uses, it's been identified that this is a high potential for everyday biking. So again, that ties into this risk assessment. And then for lane departures, I didn't mention earlier, that segment from between the two Water Street legs, that's been identified as a primary risk for lane departures. This is a location where speed is getting up above 45 miles per hour. I think there's a tendency by drivers, once they're cleared of the congestion around Route 3, they start to pick up speed, the speed limit, and roadway geometry, roadway geometry certainly allows for that. So they're picking up speed, and then they're, in this particular section at least, they're going into some curvature. So hence, this is a high risk site for lane departures. So given all this, what kind of improvements are we looking at identifying in the study? First would be access management. So um, there's already a lot of good access management happening with the developments along near the Route 3 interchange. There's some shared driveways. That's pretty easy. For example, if you're at the 99 restaurant, it's easy to get over to Old Church Street without ever going on 139. Likewise, if you're at the plaza with urgent care, you can get over to where Burger King is, for example, without getting onto 139. So there is some really good access management, but we would always look at methods for improving that. Environmental, I showed a environmental map earlier. We certainly want to mitigate and limit any stormwater runoff into these natural areas where there's forest or wetland, and particularly those outlets of the North River. So that's something that we would look at. First of all, identifying if there's any issues right now, and then making recommendations to improve that. Traffic calming strategies. Yeah, so this is a principal arterial, so it's not like we're going to slow traffic down to 25 miles per hour. However, either areas where we can look at employing strategies to reduce travel speeds a little bit to find a balance between moving traffic efficiently, but also making sure our vulnerable roadway users are safe. And perhaps maybe the only way, I'll talk about this in a moment, maybe perhaps the only way to ensure that they're safe is to have an off-road facility. So roadway maintenance, pavement's in fairly good condition, but there are areas that could use some love, use some maintenance. So that is something that we'll be highlighting in the study. We'll also look at the sidewalk conditions. As I mentioned, sidewalk varies in condition along the corridor, and we'd make recommendations on that as well as culvert. And when we're out there, we notice some deterioration of the surface above the above the culvert. So that is something that's already been highlighted, brought to the attention of MassDOT, and will be included in this study. A continuous bicycle and pedestrian network. So a corridor like this, ideally, we would want an off-road shared use path. So something completely separated from the lanes of travel, where both pedestrians and bicyclists can use. That's often easier said than done. You usually need at least about, if you're gonna have both pedestrians and bicyclists, you usually need about 10 feet, at least 8. So that's again, it's easier said than done, but that's something that we would look at. Um, Intersections and segment capacity. So when we looked at I didn't talk a lot about the level of service with the traffic lights at Route 3. We did some analysis using a software application we use called Synchro. Synchro indicated that these signals are actually working pretty well. Their timing is it has from I should note that it has a dynamic um, timing sequence, meaning it does adjust itself based on volume and time of day. It works really well, but the bottleneck that we are seeing, so we all know that there's a lot of congestion there. There can be a perception that it's the result of poor signal timing, uh, but really what we're seeing is a capacity issue with the left lanes, the left storage lanes for the ramps are just not adequate to store the amount of vehicles making those left turns. And not just the ramps, the left turn lane at Old Oak Street as well. Again, not enough not enough capacity for the demand that's flowing back into the travel lanes, and that's what's causing a lot of the congestion and bottleneck at these intersections, not necessarily the signal timing. And that's a long-term thing that we'll be working with MassDOT with. And then finally, evaluation of heavy vehicle exclusion zones. So some of the coordination meetings that we had, it was noted that some of there's a tendency sometimes for heavy vehicles to turn off of 139 and then onto some of the side streets like Water Street, despite being signed as a truck exclusion. So that's something that we will look at. Are there other areas where there should be truck exclusions and just keep trucks on 139 itself? So that is something that we will be evaluating. So finally, the next steps looking ahead. So later this summer, next couple months, I would say we're going to come up with the draft report. The first step of that would be to circulate that internally with both uh, our our staff and our board of directors, as well as the state MassDOT. Once that first internal review is done, well, like I say, we circulate with MassDOT internally with us, as well as the town officials in Pembroke. They would be the first stage of review for this. Then it would go out to a general public review and comment period where everyone could review it and provide comments. We'll take all the comments that we get, incorporate it into the report appropriately, and then by late summer, we would finalize um, this study with an endorsement by our NPO in September. So the program year does end on September 30th. This study will be completed by September 30th. So with that, I'll take I'm happy to take any questions and talk about anything in more detail. This is the main purpose of this meeting, to hear your thoughts and your input.
Bill, we have a question in the chat. Samantha Woods from the North and South Rivers Watershed Association asks, can you say any more about the traffic accidents at the Lorna Avenue intersection?
Um, so I we have the data. We have the crash reports. There's nothing that off the top of my head that has jumped out at me, but we'll certainly take a closer look at that. Um, was there something specific that she was curious about? I don't know if she want.
She didn't say.
Okay.
Samantha, please feel free to put follow up in the chat or unmute yourself if you'd like and ask your question verbally.
So I will say, while we wait for that, the when we look at the intersection of Lorna as well as the intersection of Brick Hill, while we didn't see we didn't see a high volume of crashes. Those are two locations where we're seeing some of the highest travel speeds. So we uh, automatically be concerned about any crashes happening there because uh, when you have a a through movement speed rate 85th percentile speed of 45 miles per hour higher, then any collision that's occurring is gonna, especially an angled collision, is gonna carry the high possibility of serious injuries.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry, it's on my phone watching you. I just, my name is Samantha Woods. I'm the director for the North and South Rivers Watershed, and I was particularly interested in the section of the roadway because we just purchased the land across the road there, 160 Squeezit, and our plan is to make it into our headquarters for the watershed and have it be a public regional center for river education, recreation, and so just wanted to hear about, what the current conditions for traffic were. That was why I asked about the Lorna Ave
Okay.
accidents.
Yeah. So
Uh,
we didn't see a we didn't see a big history of crashes there. But we'll certainly take a closer look at the severity. And if there are any recommendations that can be made for that intersection.
Yeah.
When
And
you're taking a
Bill,
left
if you,
turn
oh,
out of
sorry.
sorry, I was just the current location is being used by a retail shop. I'll have to have it, and
Oh, okay.
take that left out of there. You know, when people are accelerating at 45 miles an hour and coming at you, it's daunting. So just kind of trying to figure out if we can calm that down um, in that area, since we'll be having more people hopefully visiting that site. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about was the culvert under Route 139 that Robinson's Creek
Hmm.
travels under. And yeah, I think you mentioned that there had been some assessment of that culvert. I'd love to hear more about what the condition of that culvert might be, and whether we could make it navigable at certain tides. That is a place you can actually paddle under. We have. It's just full of sediment, I'll tell you that. Probably some stormwater runoff.
Just seeing if we have, is Matt's not here, is he?
Yes, yes.
Yep,
Okay.
I'm here.
Matt.
Yeah, and we're talking about the uh, culvert for Robinson Creek. Is that correct?
Hmm.
Yes, Matt, that's right. It's Sam.
Uh, hey, Sam, how are you?
I'm
Yeah,
good. How you
so
doing?
good, good. So the overall condition of that culvert, you know, it was a little bit in rough shape to the point where we had to call Mass DOT just because we were concerned for the condition.
Right.
They had sent out some engineers shortly after to just double check to make sure that it wasn't an imminent threat to public safety or anything like that.
Right.
And yeah, for the sediment underneath, like I see your point for like when it's high tide, it would be definitely hard um, to navigate that because there's not a lot of clearance there for kayaks, never mind a boat or whatnot. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
I
I think
my
kayaks is what we're thinking.
okay.
Yeah, we're
I
not
think
trying to put a
think
big boat under there.
right. I figured you were kayak people than motorboat people, but just in case. But my
We do both,
recommendation,
but you know.
my suggestion for that, just as I was doing climate modeling on it, of like what will it look like with hurricanes and rising sea levels and everything like that. My overall recommendation would to bring that up to Massachusetts stream crossing standards and
Yeah,
expand it
let's go.
and make it into more of a bridge than a culvert, just because, as you know, it's such a small culvert and small opening to Robinson Creek. And I
Yep.
think it would really help with climate resiliency for the communities for sure. So that's my recommendation because I did go out during a king tide
Yeah.
to fly the drone and take pictures, and I believe that will be in the report in the environmental chapter, just to kind of show what does it look like when it's at almost capacity with a king's tide. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, so I agree with you, Sam, that there's a lot of great potential there for upgrading that crossing. And when I say crossing, for the stream and the
Yep.
fish. So yeah, I agree with you that there's a lot of good potential there. So I think this coming November, it's due for its annual inspection from Mass DOT. And hopefully they read our wonderful report and say, yep, it's spot on. So
Okay.
does that answer your question, Sam?
Yeah, to some extent, but Matt, maybe you can, well, I don't know if that data for the measurements and everything are available yet, but if you could, whatever data you can share, we'd love to see it because we purchased the abutting property. We actually own the land now that abuts Robinson's Creek and
Oh,
that culvert.
congratulations. That's great. Yeah, and we're going to go out again next Friday to do measurements again, a part of our training for culvert title influence culverts, I guess. Sorry, title influence
Yeah.
culverts. So we're going to go out again next Friday to measure.
Okay.
So if that's something that you guys are interested in joining us, we can definitely connect offline and go out as a group
Yeah.
and do it.
Let's do
So
that. I'll get Beth Howard, who's our culvert person, to see if she's available next Friday to come. I'm sure she would really like to participate. So,
Yeah,
um,
I think that'd be wonderful. And I'll send you, I believe I have the measurements still from last time we went out, if we haven't been uploaded onto NAC.
okay. Is there a storm drain right there?
Yes,
It's yeah,
there are storm drains that drain into the culvert.
right. That's what I thought. That's why I think there's a lot of sediment in there.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely there is definitely a lot of sediment underneath the bridge.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember walking up, there was definitely lifted up and then dropped back down.
Okay. Yeah, well,
So,
excited. It's serendipitous that you guys are doing this study just as we are moving into the neighborhood.
perfect.
Um,
Well,
yeah,
we'll be in touch.
yeah.
And we'll bring a
So
housewarming gift too.
yeah, yeah. Well, maybe it's a new culvert. We can certainly advocate with you to see how we can help bring resources to that.
That'd
Obviously.
be that'd be great. Thanks, Sam.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, Matt. We'll talk soon.
And Bill, if you'd like, I do have the table pulled up for the crash analysis that I did. I could talk really quick about the crashes at Lorna Avenue that
Sure.
Samantha was talking about. So Samantha, in the 5 years that we did the analysis from 2021 to 2025, there were only 7 crashes that were geotagged at the intersection of 139 and Lorna Avenue. And only one of those crashes had an injury. The rest were solely property damage. There were 2 rear end crashes and then one each of an angle crash, a rear to side, a side swipe same direction, side swipe opposite direction, and then one single vehicle crash. So it was tied for the lowest amount of crashes by intersection for all the intersections that we had done the turning movement counts at. Um, obviously one crash is one too many, but at least in the grand scheme of things, it is on the lower end of the crash frequency.
Is
Mhm.
there information and detail about was the crash from people going from 139 into Lorna Ave? Or, I'm just curious as to, how that crash, like, is it people leaving Lorna Ave trying to get on 139? Or in which way were they trying to go? That kind of stuff. Maybe we could see the detail because, we would be across the street with a lot of people trying to figure out how to probably cross that left turn, that left, if they're taking a left out of there, they got
Yes,
to cross the oncoming traffic.
I do not have that information in front of me, but I have your email address from when you registered for tonight's meeting. So I will gather all of the data that I can with regards to these crashes, and I will follow up with you in an email separately.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
It's one other
And
thing about
and
that.
just for another just comment, like anything we can do to both calm traffic on that roadway as well as allow for pedestrian and bicycle um, movement safely. Again, we're going to have what we hope will be an attractive site for recreation for people to access the river um, and do paddling and education and kids camps and all that stuff. So we're just really excited about it, but we want to make sure if we have an opportunity to try to make it as safe as possible.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And I just put in the chat the link to where we got all of the crash data. It's from MassDOT's Impact crash portal. You can do a search of an intersection, of a town, of a single street, and you can set your own time frame for 1 year, 3 year, 5 years, and you can select as much. You can select as many fields as you would like to see information for any of the crashes. So this is the tool that we utilized for this, and we have utilized for other projects. But like I said, I've already downloaded the raw data, so I will organize it. I will organize the data specific for this intersection, and like I said, we'll follow up with you separately.
That's great, Sean. Thank you. I'm on my phone, so I can't really access what you're sending, but if you can send it separately in an email, that would be perfect.
Yes, I'll also provide the hyperlink when I email you the data.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And the traffic calming comment, that was a perfect segue into what I was going to mention. So in our report, I didn't So everything that, we've looked at and have included in our report so far, I wasn't able to include in this presentation for the sake of time. Just I focused on some of the more specific locations, some of the high risk intersections. But so in terms of that area where Lorna Drive is and have to have it business, this was highlighted in the report and study. There's a crosswalk there. It's actually the one lone crosswalk on this entire corridor. Well, not including an intersection. And it's it was probably fine design standards when it was put in. It's a little bit substandard of what we'd like to ideally see nowadays for a corridor like this with those travel speeds. So this has been identified as an area where we not only want to see that crosswalk upgraded to what would be ideal standards by modern design standards, but we'd also, at least in this one particular area, we would like to identify methods that we could calm traffic and slow speeds down as they're approaching that crossing. Since this is a location that, like I said, it's the one location where there's a crosswalk, and not only the crosswalk itself, but we'd want to make sure we'd like to see better sidewalk connections on the north side of 139. So all the sidewalk along this corridor is on the south side or the eastbound direction, if you will. So where that crosswalk is, we would like to see new sidewalks connected from where that crosswalk is to some of the residential neighborhoods along that corridor.
Is that good?
That's great. I've also noticed that crosswalk and wondered about like how safe anybody would feel trying to get across there. Like
Yeah,
maybe, yeah, maybe there's a, I know sometimes they put the lights that you can, press the makes the flashing light happen. I
mhm.
don't know if that would be enough, but it might be something to
Yeah,
stop the traffic.
yeah, that's certainly one thing that we'd look at. Other things we'd look at higher visibility treatments for the crosswalk itself. We may look at narrowing the travel lanes a little bit as they approach the crosswalk to slow traffic down a little bit. So there's a multitude of options that we can look at to improve safety there.
Sounds good. We're all for it.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments?
None, no other questions in the chat, but if any of the other people in attendance have any questions or comments you'd like to make, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Okay. Well, we'll go to the last slide again with the
Oh,
contact info. So, again, thank you for all coming out tonight on this beautiful night. And it's probably the last thing you want to be doing tonight is a public meeting and not outside barbecuing or something. But we really appreciate your time and your participation in this process, whether you were here tonight or if you participated in our survey or if you contacted us online. We really appreciate it. As I mentioned, so we're developing the report now. That report will be completed this summer. There will be a public review and comment period where everybody will have a chance to review the document and provide comments. My contact information is here. Feel free to contact me anytime. We also can also access my contact information or contact with any of our colleagues through our website at oldcolonyplanning.org. You can also find the information page for the study on there as well. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming tonight. And that's nobody has anything else. We'll certainly be in touch and stay tuned to our emails and our announcements for the draft announcement, or draft, or announcement of the draft report, I should say. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.